Right, let's get started. Oh, hi everyone. I'm excited to speak with you today about this topic, and I hope that by the end of this session, we all have learned something valuable. Before we begin, I'd like to perhaps share why you might want to listen to me. I have spent many years in the design field, gaining experiences across various business setups, which has allowed me to develop a comprehensive skill set relevant to today's topic. Currently, I work as a senior product designer at Klarna, which is popularly known by the by now political paradigm. Though we do more than that. Feel free to share your feedback after the session. I'd really love to hear from you. And let's get into what we're going to look at today. So today we're going to cover all these topics, and I also hope that we would have some time for questions at the end of this session. So we're going to look at the context of effective and efficient research in small and growing teams, the importance of research, the research mindsets, methods. I'm going to tell you a story, and we're going to just talk briefly about next steps. Just show of hands. Can everyone see or hear me? Okay, great. Um, and now to the next thing. So I think it's important that we start off by clarifying like the context of what small and growing teams are. So I'd like to establish defining what this means. And to me, small teams typically consist of a few members. Usually, it might range from one, might be a one-man team, but usually less than 10. However, the methods that we're going to discuss today can also apply to larger teams. Some key characteristics of these teams, might include high adaptability, tight deadlines, or inescapable deadlines, resource constraints, and a need for multitasking. So you have the likes of agencies, startups, scale-ups, freelance or contract work, or being a fractional designer, maybe if you worked in in-house teams or consultancies. So I'm hoping that this applies to all of you on the call. But again, if it doesn't apply to you, I still think it's important if you're trying to build a product or a future. And what is it that these small teams are trying to achieve, right? So small teams strive to achieve this things. So we have market fit growth, sustainable expansion, to stand out in the competitive market, generate revenue, monetization being like one of the most important things for sure. Um, Optimizing available resources effectively. This is a non-exhaustive list, by the way. It's just a list of common themes across different business setups, striving to achieve success. And I think that as designers or just being like a part of the team, we all play an important role and significant role in this effort. However, we do face, certain particular challenges, I'd say. Uh, and I think, the premise of that is we make excuses. So I'd like to see a show of hands if, you've had any of those statements before, before you start a project or as you work on a project, right? We need to move fast. There's no time for research. Can we look at, what companies are doing already? They figure this out. Let's focus on building the product. We can fix things later. Yada, 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 yada. I'm sure there's a lot more than that. But the biggest one, the bad boy, really is that there is no time and there's no budget for it, for research. Um, and I'm really sure that many of you, have faced this challenge. Um, and unless you have a crystal ball or a patent for predicting the future, it's very likely that you won't know the outcome of your future or your product you're building unless it gets to users' hands, unless it's, users are confronted by this feature or this, product, so to say. Um, but I also want to caveat this by saying that I would assume that, you've already validated the problem and the market, right? So I would like to talk about this, but we don't have the time. Validating the problem and the market, even before you start building a product. So this session is particularly about validating product ideas and features and hypotheses, and not validating as to whether um, users are going to love your product or they're going to buy your product. I think that's an entirely different topic. I am also aware that most startups, usually what happens is the trend really is that as a founder or, you know, as an organization, you come up with an idea, and then you think it's really cool. You have a vision for it, and then you build it, and then you start to find market fit. This is like the case. This is the common case. That's like what how most startups are set up right now. They're just looking for finding customers, looking for the largest base of customers, blah blah blah. Anyway, moving on. Now, without research, right, without validating a problem, without validating a market or customer, we do face certain risk. One, as teammates, whether you're a designer, whether you're a researcher, or whether you're a product manager, a PM, and so on and so forth. What we face is lack of empathy, right? And that's why it's common that you find many designers just kind of getting straight into the problem, no empathy for the user, even though we do say that we are empathetic, but that's usually not the case. Sometimes this is obviously due to the feedback or the pushback that we get from stakeholders. It leads to a lot of frustration with reworking designs because it just didn't work out. This also affects engineers as well. They hate the rework, they don't value it. Also reduce job satisfaction. This is something that I struggle with a lot, for quite some time, actually. And ineffective metrics, so you're pursuing the wrong metrics rather, and this also leads to difficulty in demonstrating your value. And ultimately, when you, as a designer, as a PM, you're trying to create a case study for yourself. You're trying to apply to a new job. Oftentimes, you find that people are trying to, go back to the previous work and make a case for something or come up with some vanity metrics, blah blah blah. This would not have been the case if we do actually take out time to do the right research and tracking the right metrics. However, this also, on the other hand, affects companies, right? So what happens when people cannot do research and people don't conduct the right research and jump into a solution and straight is that, they're likely to lose revenue, brand damage, the million stories. Are we good? Okay. So yeah, there are a million stories out there about startups that have, you know, they started a company and then didn't last up to 5 years and they crashed and burnt investors' money. That being one of the, you know, you know, trend. I don't know if anyone has about or seen this new friend AI 2. I recently saw it on Twitter. It's about a founder that raised it's about this sort of AI 2 that you kind of put on your neck and it kind of helps you get on with your day, helps you conversation, blah blah blah. But the founder raised $2.5 million and spent about $1.8 million buying a domain name, which is pretty interesting anyway. Without product validation, at least so far, I haven't seen anything that says people love and are gonna buy this product. But yeah, this risk, to be honest, can be avoided at least to a certain extent. We do, like I said, have a role to play. As a quick aside, I would like to touch on this topic. It's significantly another topic, but just kind of touch on it briefly. It's about selling research. I think to effectively sell research to organizations, it's crucial to understand what stakeholders value and align your findings with the company's goals. You begin by sharing compelling stories that illustrate how research addresses specific pain points, how it contributes to strategic objectives, supplementing, this narrative really by just relevant data. Where people say like, oh, I cannot get my PM or my stakeholder CEO, depend on the size of the team. You have direct, and this applies to larger teams as well. If you have a director or a VP, you cannot sell research to them. I really think that you get a great chance if you're able to sort of you know co-create with stakeholders, come down to understand the company goals, pursuing the right metrics, sharing stories as well. Again, like I said, those are a million startup stories out there. You don't have to have had 10 years of experience in startup, have experience first in research to understand the pros and the cons of research. You can always look online. There are books you can read, so many books that illustrates, so many stories basically to help you communicate this idea clearly. Well, like I said, it's just a quick aside. This is like an entire topic and we can go on and on about this. And yeah, still under just establishing the context of teams, right? As the researcher, and when I say researcher, I don't mean like you have to have that title as a researcher. I think anyone can be a researcher. But let's come down to the mindset of a researcher. I think that a researcher really should embody empathy, curiosity, and a clear understanding of metrics and goals. And this also involves deeply understanding users' experiences, asking insightful questions, and aligning research with strategic objectives, right? And also, it's important that you are very crucial that you are, you know, can adapt to any setup, right? One thing I was, try to do in my job is to be very aware of the resources that I have around me, aware of my situation, reading the room, to be able to sort of, easily adapt to whatever research is right at the right time, you know, what results we're trying to get. So just having that openness basically as a culture is important. And so now that we've sort of established that research is important and very, very crucial to product development, the product development process and cycle, we're getting closer to the meat of the session, right? Um,
Open my arms to hold you because
okay, are we good? Um, yeah. So now that we've established the importance of research, let's look at some characteristics of effective and efficient research. So as you have here, we have agile, iterative, cost-effective, yada yada yada. I know while this might sound like buzzwords, I think it's important to note that there are not a silver bullet as well, or like a panacea, for all your organizational research problems. However, I think that will surely lead you to positive results. And what is a presentation without a diagram? So yeah, I've just put a diagram of you know the basic loop of you know effective and efficient research. And to me, we often say we want to build a product as a development team. As a product team, we want to build a future, we want to build a product. I think it starts really by kind of reframing that and rephrasing that to say hypothesis, because you never really know until it gets to users' ends. You never really know until you test it. You never really know until it gets out to the market. So really all this still falls on the hypothesis, and this helps us reduce risk. When we see things that we're trying to build as hypothesis rather than feature sets or products, it helps us reduce risk. It helps us, sort of quickly move faster, and it helps us kind of adapt this failure mindset, right? Like you fall, you pick yourself back up, you move on. And then the next process is you design, right? You come up with something, you build something, and then you measure, right? You test it, and then you learn, and you just kind of, this is sort of like the wheel that drives this mindset that we discussed previously. And it's just four basically steps, the way that I see. This could be sort of, substituted for different, labels, but it still points down to the same thing. And at the center of it is you just want to validate early and often. And that's what makes it efficient. That's what makes it effective. Um, and like I said, we're now at the meat and the center and the heart of this conversation. Um, we've established the context. We've discussed about the mindset. We've outlined the characteristics of effective and efficient research. So let's dive into it, the real thing. I understand that it can be difficult to determine which type of research method is right for you or your team or your product. So I've tried to just add some context to all of these methods that I'm going to be outlining in a more digestible way. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to kind of talk about this things personally. We cannot cover the in-depth details of each and every one of these methods. To be honest, we cannot because you have like the do's and the don'ts, the guidelines. But I will implore you to sort of do further research on these methods, right? Just kind of get the tenets of these methods. There are a lot of case studies out there about this method, so you can read up on them. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. But yeah, we're going to be looking at some excellent options for just gathering feedback in a more effective and efficient way. Gathering feedback and data on your product. Uh, there are two things to note as I was presenting the subsequent methods, is that it's not a linear process, and I have chosen the images, and these images might not perfectly represent the idea or convey the concept. I do not have patience for choosing images when I'm trying to make a presentation, unfortunately, which is not a good quality, but something I'm working on. Um, but yeah, starting with the first method, which is internal stakeholder interviews. and I think the context for this sort of you know method is when you're working on a project for the first time, right? You haven't started to go into Figma or whatever tool you use, whether it's Miro to draw rectangles and squares and flows, whatever. No, you're trying to basically establish and understand and learn the business goals, right? So this is really good. And like I said, I split this into just this framework to kind of help you get a quick sense of what these things are good for and what they're bad for or what they're not recommended for. But it helps you kind of get a quick, understand like the existing processes, resources, and historical context. A lot of times, our stakeholders, and this might be engineers, might be anyone on your team that is part of a product team, marketers, whatever, usually have an opinion. Again, as a hypothesis, and I think there's so much benefit just talking to people within your organization to get, early historical data on what exists, what the beliefs are. Right? And with this, you can help align with the business goals. And this helps you importantly pursue the right metrics and helps you come up with the right research methods, which we're going to talk about briefly later. However, I would not recommend this, especially if you're trying to, get real customer insights. They're not the user in most cases, even if they should be, because the problem sometimes just start from you anyway. So the biases from people, stakeholders generally can influence the outcomes of this research method, right? People, again, like I said, they have their opinion, but you want to surface all of the agendas as much as possible, all of the goals and personal agendas as much as possible. The next method, yeah, is something I often use, especially when I start on projects as well in the early stages of product development. It's sort of you might call it a preliminary persona. It's just like a fictitious and imagined profile of a user, and it's created by gathering data again from your interviews, from talking to like just people within your team, so the internal organization. You create assumptions, based on what the team knows already, what they don't know maybe, and it's sort of used in place of a data-driven persona. So rather than actual detailed persona that is driven by data, continuously, it just helps you paint a picture to understand who your target audience might be. Emphasis on might be. Again, this is just a random image that I picked on the internet, so I do not have copyright to all these images. Funny joke, by the way. I was gonna, use just an image of a guy, yeah, to illustrate the idea, but I thought it might be better to do this and convey the information better. But I was gonna make a joke about this dude in the background. You might be familiar with this dude, or you already have an idea who this guy is. I think at this point is a meme already. I have no idea why people use that image often in the designs. I just chose it for the same reason people choose it. But yeah, just saying. However, this sort of method is kind of bad, if you kind of want to base this on actual user data. So I do not recommend for actual user data. It's kind of like just to kick off the project, get some ideas. Again, hypothesis, because it lacks depth and accuracy compared to data-driven personas. But it really helps, kind of give the team some direction and kind of just start to invoke some empathy wherever that lies. And here's another method. This is also one very popular one. Basically heuristics is a mental shortcut for solving problems. That's that's what the name, that's the definition of the word heuristics. It just kind of helps you solve problems in a quick way that delivers results that is sufficient enough to be useful, within like a constricted time frame. There is a popular guideline, on how to do this. It was initially, I think it was pioneered by Jacob and Nelson. That's the Norman NN group. Very, very, very resourceful blog that I go to every now and then if I need design knowledge. I recommend to definitely check them out. But this is one that is very good also in the early stages of your design before user testing. Also, it's used for evaluation and assessment of existing products, right? So with this, you can kind of get quick iterative design improvements. I think it's also business psychology as well, so it's really good. They've been tested and they've proven to work. So in terms of what this is good for, really, it's evaluating user interface design against established usability principles. These are principles that have originated from millions and millions of work and websites across the internet. So I'd say it's credible. It's an excellent. It also helps you provide rapid insights without needing to user involvement, right? Like you don't need the users yet. Again, we're talking about effectiveness and efficiency, and part of the qualities we talked about is like fast and cheap. So this is just one of those fast and cheap methods to help you quickly validate your designs, because there is always a likely chance that you're going to miss something out. Always, whether it's a spelling, whether it could be anything, just any component. So I would always recommend, in any case this applies, I believe. However, I would not recommend it for user specific insights, because it doesn't actually account for real user behaviors or preferences. Users are not predictable as such. Also, you may miss real user issues, right? Issues that users might actually encounter. So it's also likely that you might do that. So it's not great for comprehensive testing, especially if you're building like a critical product, right? It's not the best. To the next one, I often don't find myself using this, but I think it's also very, very helpful. And it could be done for almost free. However, I think it's best if you do incentivize people, because people really hate to write, except you can sort of provide pre-selected answers for them. As you may wonder what a survey is, right? We've all interacted with surveys at one point in time, and you can definitely agree that we hate to type. We rather just those pre-selected options, and you choose one. But oftentimes that can lead to a bias, right? But not to jump the gun, I would say like this is great for post-launch feedback. I think it's the most important useful when you launch a product, you're trying to get feedback, you're trying to validate hypotheses from your qualitative research. So usually what I imagine is you start off with some qualitative research, right? You find out why people are doing what they're doing, user behaviors, their habits, their likes and their dislikes, and you have some hypotheses. And then you can sort of validate at scale, right? So you can kind of just test at scale, right? So you're going from qualitative, to quantitative. And I think it's also just great for data collection for sure, because getting a real sense of understanding users' preferences, satisfaction, and demographics, right? So I think this is one of those methods that you can use specifically in a situation where, again, you're trying to validate an hypothesis, because this would not tell you if users love your product or if they would even use it, right? So yeah, you can this is not recommended for if you're looking to get like unbiased answers. You have to be careful. You have to sort of painstakingly design these questions or the survey questions in a rather insightful way, that helps you reduce the biases. Someone trying to say something? Okay. Now to the next one. This is one of my favorite methods, because I like to get down and dirty with the craft. I think that this is one of the most beneficial methods that you can use, form of research. And I'm saying this based on my experience, because I have used this so many times. It can make or break your product. This is relevant as well in the early stages of design and product development, right? Usually you want to sort of, before you even write one line of code whatsoever, this is where you kind of want to spend, your resources, like your time and your energy first, right? And it basically just involves creating a series of mockups that can help users achieve their goals. You're basically just connecting screens through various interactions. And I think it's also important to note that because there's so many ways you can solve a problem, right? There's so many ways you can design a form, right? However, what you're looking for is like the fastest way and the easiest way that users can get a task done, right? So it's crucial that you present your solution to users to ensure that your approach and your implementation will work for them effectively and for your target users. Um, and the closer your markup are, because I know that this is also time consuming, right? This is probably one of those research methods that would require you spending a lot more time and resources for sure. But I think it's very beneficial. The closer your mockups are to the final product, the more valuable feedback you receive. Which I guess that explains itself. By the way, I don't remember where I got this screen from, so I just got it from the internet. It just looked nice, so I took it. So don't call me out for this. Yes, and in terms of just what this is good for, really, I think it's really good for just getting quick feedback, testing design concepts, gathering some sort of like hype whatsoever, Again, this is not to test if people would love your product. Like this is not, you're not doing like a market validation with this, but I mean, if you're going to do it with this, there's a certain way to go about that. Like I said, that's a different topic. It's like when you do ethnographic research and all that. But just kind of get a sense of, how easy your product is to use. Even though I would say sometimes you might get a sense of hype as to whether it's a good idea or like a terrible idea. You find people might, sort of, you know, screaming delight with delight when they see your products. Because I've done certain tests where, we presented the product idea, to a user, and they were like, no way, this is really cool. I want to see this in the next version of the app. And there are also times where we presented like rapid prototype tests, done prototype presentations to customers, and they're like, I don't think I need this, like they don't even want to see it. So, doing that is much better than having to just go in, write a line of write like a bunch of code. Maybe if you do like a waterfall model, which I do not recommend, in any case, and then you realize that customers don't like it, they're not going to buy it. That can kind of frustrate everyone. And to the next one, A/B testing and web analytics. This is also one that I think, is data heavy, and so data wins arguments. It wins. It helps you show value as a designer as well. When people talk about this, the ROI of design, I think this is just one of those research methods that you can quickly set up. So long your company is willing to pay for it. I don't think it costs much, to be honest. There are a lot of tools out there now, and you can find the best one. There you have Amplitude, you have Full Story. You can get into like the weeds and the natural, like kind of see how people are using your product and see what product is better, what version of your product is better. But really, A/B testing involves just comparing two versions, sometimes maybe more, of a web page or an app feature or hypothesis. Don't forget that, to determine which one performs better. Because again, there are so many ways you could be solving a problem. Um, and web analytics just kind of involves just collecting and continuously monitoring and analyzing and interpreting data from your app or website interactions to understand users' behavior. Here's just a simple illustration of what that could look like. I got as well from the internet, from one of this very nice blog post. But as you can see here, this is a quick example of a tab bar, for example. So you have sort of this open tab bar, and you have sort of this, uncollapsed tab bar style. And basically, the result of this two version, as you can see, is that when they kind of updated from this to this, there was a drop in user engagement, which is fairly simple, out of sight, out of mind. I think that to kind of get the best, out of this method, right? You need to have an established metrics. You need to have a vibe metrics, right? A measurable metrics. You need to know what you're trying to. What are you aiming for? Are you aiming for engagement? Are you aiming for conversion? Are you aiming for whatever it is across your funnel? So it's important to understand that, or have a strong opinion on that. So I think this is good for just testing to see if, different versions of a feature to see which performs better. Especially if after testing you can exactly tell, from rapid testing that one is better than the other. It also helps you kind of make decisions based off user behavior and preferences. Like I said, there's a tool called Full Story I've used in the past. Great tool. You can just get like user sessions, and seeing how people are kind of going about their daily task. However, I think it's kind of bad, if you're trying to focus on, getting deeper user insight motivation, because it doesn't exactly tell you why users are doing what they're doing. But I think it's also very relevant. And then there's customer feedback channel. Yes, I think if you are claiming to be a product-led company, this is something that you should definitely have in your arsenal. And the meaning is fairly evident, right? I think some people might argue that listening to your users is a waste of time, because users don't always know what they want. Like you've all heard of that, users don't know what they want. And this very common saying, if you ask users, if they want that, I think something about faster horses, and then they say, yes, I want faster horses. However, they won't tell you they wanted a car, right? I don't think that applies, you know, um, 100% of the time, right? I think that customers can be right. I have worked on, certain features that were, basically driven and initiated by customers, right? The important thing to do here is to take that feedback, kind of examine it, understand the why, and see how much, of your high value users really, really need this feature. And there's certain ways to go about that, right? There's the fake door test, which is basically just sort of putting up like a prop in your website. Say, for example, you're trying to add like a chat feature to a certain app, and you have like a fake icon that says chat, and people click on it, and you kind of measure the amount of people that actually can click on that feature to see the level of interest or the level of intent having that feature. However, the repercussion is you want to make sure that you have a really good, feedback to tell them, hey, we don't have it yet, come back later, whatever. But yeah, it's really important, to I think, to listen to users. I'm not saying take their word as gospel, but I think it can be extremely beneficial to have some sort of channel to get user feedback. There's Zendesk as well, and actually, I remember there's this story of a company that I worked for in the past that neglected user feedback, and somehow it led to a lot of churn. They neglected that feature for 2 years, and it cost them millions and millions of dollars. So yes, this is good for just regularly gathering user opinions and suggestions and helping you sort of like prioritize your backlog sometimes, understanding ongoing issues and areas of improvement. Right. I think it is bad, for sure. Like if you're trying to receive feedback in a structured way, this is not great per se. Also, you have generalizability because the percentage of users that are giving you feedback on a certain feature or hypothesis might not necessarily represent your broader user base or even your high value user base. Um, but yeah, also an important method. And then we have unmoderated user testing. This basically involves gathering feedback quickly in a cost-effective way without having to interact with your potential users. So basically just involves setting up some prototypes, setting up a number of relevant tasks, and then pushing that out for testing. And it's pretty fast, cheap, and quick. What you're trying to really determine is if your product is intuitive enough for someone or just anyone within your possible target group to use. And even though they've never seen the product before, you really want to just understand how is it just to use for strangers, right? So you might be testing like a new onboarding, like a new user onboarding flow to see how like people are onboarding on you, and whatever pain that exists, in that flow. Um, and this is really good, at the later stages of the usability testing for sure. Now you've built a product, you've done some rapid prototype testing, and now you just want to kind of quickly validate if this is easy to use, if this works or not. Again, it's not to test if people love your product or not. And the good thing is you can do this at scale. You can get feedback pretty quick. And I also love this method, actually. I don't know why I didn't favorite it, but I really love this method as well. And this is definitely bad if you're trying to probe user reaction, or if users might actually struggle with like, guidance leading to incomplete feedback. Okay, we're 34 minutes in. That's interesting. I hope no one has nodded off. We're almost at the end of this. Competitors testing. Yes. So this is great. This is great even before you build a product. I think this is something that goes in line with even, you know, um, what you call stakeholders research, right? Where you can basically use testing to see if you can leverage your competitors' weaknesses, learn from their strengths. There's definitely a high chance that competitors are making mistakes and causing pain for users. I don't want to know what product you're using. There's no product that is perfect, right? They're always going to cause pain one way or the other. And one advantage is that you can conduct this analysis even before you start working on your product or feature. And it's pretty straightforward, right? You get, your possible target group, or you get, users of a likely competitor that are likely to use your product as well, assuming that you've done some research, and you just kind of get that in front of them, get them to test it, ask questions like, "What do you like about this? What don't you like? What do you think is missing? Blah blah blah, yada yada yada." Like I said, there are steps, do's and don'ts, guidelines, and tenets that help you get the best out of this method. Well, because we don't have the time to go deep into these things, I would implore you to go and do more research. By the way, I would say that this would be Crowd with sponsoring this session, and that would be Maze very soon, very soon. But yeah, I couldn't come up with a really good image. The idea, yeah, obviously paints that picture, right? Kind of pursuing your competitors. Um, and this is really good for benchmarking and understanding how your product compares to competitors. It helps you kind of find gaps in the market and areas for differentiation. Of course, this is bad for innovation. Like if you're trying to innovate, it's easy to kind of get biased and just kind of copy and paste and bastardize whatever your competitors are doing. That's not the case. I don't, try to avoid that for sure. And also, like, you don't want to make assumptions that if a certain competitor is doing something and it works, your users are also going to love it, right? You don't know. For example, there are so many features in the Apple phone and the Apple OS, but I can tell you that users are only probably using 20% of the features of the Apple phone, and so there might be some certain design feature that most users don't even use, and so they don't invest in those features. They just kind of go on with it. You never know. You never can tell. So make sure that it is very particular to your use case and it applies and is relevant for your users. And hence, this is just sort of getting some idea on how to drive, your products to help you differentiate and help you create attractive and performant features. And the next thing, Guerrilla, I'm not sure why it's named Guerrilla, but anyway, the first meaning of Guerrilla actually that I know is like freedom fighter. However, the second meaning is, basically just impromptu stuff. And I hope it's quite evident that, this basically involves just impromptu usability tests to help you again identify flaws in your product, in a cost effective and a speedy manner. And it's very relevant in the context of early stages of design and development that requires like fast feedback and inexpensive feedback. Um, it might sound straightforward, but the process can be pretty hard, especially because it involves finding a victim. Yeah, but I mean like a random stranger, perhaps in a coffee shop or wherever you might find as a social, wherever you think it's like a social level to meet people. And but I'm using the example your coffee shop because you'd always find people in the coffee shop, and just offering them something in exchange for their time to test your product. And the goal is really just to determine and understand if your products, how people interact with your products, right? Just to get a sense of if they understand what your product does, the value of your product real quick. Again, it's not a test if your product is gonna, you know, if people are right, if users are gonna buy your product, if they're gonna love it, if they're gonna be willing to pay for it, right? So it's just kind of good, if you're trying to conduct like impromptu user tests in public spaces, if you're trying to get like initial user reactions to concepts, to prototypes. But I think you can also doing this for free. If you do have a really good charisma, or you can, find a way to communicate with people and convince them to do it, you know, without having to incentivize them. Um, However, it's important to note that they're not great for targeted insights because you're talking to a random stranger. They might not particularly be representative of your target base, right? Again, it's just to get a real sense of whether your product is usable or not. And it lacks a structure of a controlled environment for sure. So it's just going to be very informal, but I think it's also very beneficial. And yeah, bonus point. I mean, AI is doing rounds now, so it's almost impossible not to talk about it. But I think in my recent time working as a designer, still working as a designer anyway, I found AI to be incredibly useful for almost every stage in the product development process. Especially because it enhances efficiency. It brings depth in automating data analysis. You do some research, you put some data together, you do surveys, you can easily just put that into a system and get themes and patterns and to help inform your decisions, right? To give you really relevant insight. And it's fast and it's also scalable. So I think that the idea here is to kind of just sit back and think about how you can use AI in whatever stage or product development stage you are. And research in this case, just kind of finding where AI can help you augment, you know, research data. I think that it's not 100% accurate for sure, so you need some human touch, and I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. So you're better off just kind of riding on the back of the AI horse. But also it's great for just helping to augment, psychology and documentation. And speaking of psychology, I think that I cannot overstate the importance of psychology. I have used this so much in my design process. In fact, some of the methods that we mentioned previously, a lot of them are comes at zero cost, right? Or could come at zero cost, like the gorilla test, the heuristics evaluation, right? These things, the customer feedback form, you know, it could come at zero cost. And psychology is also one of those things that I particularly find very handy, very useful, and very vital to design process. It also gives you some insight into actual data, which again you might use to make arguments for product decisions, right? So I'd employ there's a certain website called growth.com, I believe, but they create like a number of stories and do a lot of evaluation and assessment of products, and you can see how you can apply psychology to like different concepts. You have the primary concept. There's also the laws of UX anyway, but you have all kinds of concepts, right? Kind of understanding the user brain and how it works, the behavioral concept of humans, basically how we make choices, the cognitive, strength of humans, blah blah blah. Right? There's a lot of stuff that you can learn from psychology. So I implore you to take a look at, you know, pick up psychology books, take psychology courses. There are a bunch of resources out there. There's, well, I'd say like just check out the growth.com website. I think that you find a lot of concepts. But with psychology, you can basically get a deep understanding of user behaviors, the motivations, and the responses to help you sort of, design around user-centered structure. And one last thing, documentation. Yes, I cannot emphasize enough how important documentation is, because this also helps you, you know, weights, being able to track growth, to track the ROI of design, track your progress, track your hypothesis, and ultimately, just having a knowledge base, that can be referred to, right? When we talked about the very initial process, interviewing stakeholders, this is something that comes in very handy. It's a journey, right? It's a marathon. So this is something that helps you that comes in handy when you're trying to, even learn about, the right tools to use at the right time, the right place, blah, blah, blah. But it helps you kind of just, get a real sense of, and a real idea and a very high level view of, your progress basically, and helps you ultimately make informed decisions, and evangelize you know, the effectiveness of research. And yeah, before we go, I'm gonna just tell you a very quick story about my experience at Klarna, just one of my experiences anyway. So when I joined Klarna, back in I think 2022, maybe, but yeah, I worked. When I joined the team, the company was actually going through like a lot of, you know, reorganization, restructuring, laid people off, blah blah blah, and I was just basically assigned to a team, and this team basically had one big problem. They had a feature, however, there was a decline in the number of users on that feature. I think at the time I joined, it was about 250K active users on that product. It dropped from a million to actually it dropped from 500,000, yes, to about 250 grand. And so the stakeholders just said, hey, we want to drive the engagement up to a million users. And that's basically what they told me. And I was like, wait, like, where are we going to get these users from? And so what I did basically, is I sat down to think about if this is an actual, like, is this a measurable goal? Is this a viable goal to pursue? But most importantly, I sat them down, got them all together in the room and asked them, why do we pursuing this goal? And, the result of that was a drop in engagement for that particular feature was affecting affiliate revenue for the product. So you buy a product via that link or via that page, kind of get some money. And so as we go back, most companies are trying to increase revenue for sure. That's one of the most important metric. And so having understood that, what I did was I basically put everyone in the same room, got some real, historical context into the product, what worked, whatever worked, what are the hypotheses about what was wrong. And I put all this together, came up with a persona basically, which is a product persona. I'd not spoken to any user at this point in time. Used that to design a concept, and straight up I went to rapid testing. So did some rapid testing with users to get a just ballpark idea of what the IP is about, what people don't even care about, blah blah blah. And I got all this data, sent it back to the stakeholders. We had an idea, we built a vision. This time around, it was an hypothesis basically, and I went on to just do some unmoderated tests, and we got really good feedback. really good insight into the next steps of the product. And I kid you not, when this product was released, we've done an A/B test on two versions of the product, and surprisingly, in less than 3 months, we went above 1 million active users, weekly active users on that product. We went to 1.5. And what I always want to highlight here is without having to spend too much time, because my team technically was a small team within a startup, or a few number of people, and without spending so much of the company's resources, I was able to come up with this kind of just leverage this research methods, these effective and efficient research methods, which is just stakeholders interview, product personas, rapid prototype test, and numerator test, and A/B test to get results, right? So it doesn't always have to be about just spending money like a waterfall design, taking so much time to come up with an idea and find out it doesn't work. But again, I implore you to just do your research, spend some time understanding these methods and taking advantage of them. Now, um, yes, I know that even with all these products, methods and rules, some things might fall between the cracks. So it's important to also help you define like how you might go about making judgment calls, because a lot of times you have to make judgment calls. Just rely on your subjective point of view. But I think it really lies in asking three questions. What is the goal of this project? So you need to have a real metric and a why as to why you're pursuing the metrics. You're not just putting a button on a home page because you want people to sign up, maybe because you want people to see and understand, see if they understand the message you're trying to convey. You're not just saying, oh, you're not just putting up vanity numbers, like vanity metrics, which is what a lot of people unfortunately do. So you need to understand the goal, and to understand the goal, it means you need to talk to stakeholders, you need to talk with people, talk with your teammates. And if you're the only one on the team, talk to yourself. And why this goal? Like, why are we pushing this product? What are we trying to achieve with this? What is the result? What is the outcome of this? What metric does it, affect? Like, is it going to affect acquisition? Is it going to affect revenue? Is it going to affect market fit? Is it we're trying to scale up? Just kind of find out what this is going to, achieve, and then decide if you're going to do a quantitative or a qualitative research, right? So is it going to be a game of numbers, to validate an hypothesis, or is it going to be a game of quality? Why? So basically, the difference is why what people are doing, which is qualitative, rather quantitative, and why they're doing it, which is qualitative, right? So you want to figure that out. And I think one final thing that is missing here is risk, right? So you want to understand the risk of doing research or not. Um, so if you can understand these parameters, I think you're well equipped to make a decision on how to go about choosing these methods. And finally, next steps. And this, I would say, is just a checklist. If you haven't taken anything from this conversation in this session so far, I would say just take the following: iterate, and do it fast. Develop like an awareness for a process, like processes, and your business setup. So develop awareness for timelines and all of those things and constraints. Co-create and visualize. Yes, talk to people, talk to stakeholders, talk to your team, visualize concepts real quick. So just put some mock-ups real quick. It helps. It goes a long mile. Curiosity, yes, which is what kills the cat. In this case, you're not the cat; it's not going to kill you. So just stay curious, experiment fast, set relevant. Actually, this should be in red, but set relevant and actionable metrics. I think that a lot of times, especially designers, no shots fired, but you find that you're trying to create a portfolio, and then you have to kind of go back, come up with some like vanity metrics, whatever. I think if you sort of set up the premise really well, where you kind of do the right research, understand what you're pursuing, and you have real metrics and measurable metrics, specific metrics that you can sort of articulate, then it helps you in the long run, right? It helps you in the long run, create a worthy portfolio or project. And if it's not worth it, then don't do it. Quit your job. But kidding anyway. Build empathy. Yeah, everyone says they have empathy, yada yada yada. Like, be honest. Like, I think that this is where what can, like, a lot of times, of course, I share now that the market is really tough. It's hard to understand like the frustration we get in a job, and so you rather just get a job than care about the product itself. But I think that it's important that you actually care about the product, care about the users, even if you don't care about the stakeholder. It's enough. Those two is enough. Like, just care about the product, care about the users, and that would help you build empathy. But it starts with you and then your immediate team before it goes on to like higher ups if you're working in a large organization. And yes, practice, practice, practice. I think that not everything that I've said it might apply to you, so it's best you just kind of you know try and you know experiment with these processes, with these methods again and again to see what works for you, what works for your company, what works for your product, and what's right for you. And yeah, this brings me to the end of our session. I hope that you learned a thing or two. If you haven't, I can send you my address. We can have a fight about it. Happy to fight anyone. But hopefully, hope this was beneficial. Yeah, and I'm gonna stop sharing.